Broadcasting from Memphis, Tennessee. He's a soldier, storyteller, historian, and maybe a bit of a hellraiser. Click, listen, and enjoy. It's Dave Carter on the Ricochet Audio Network.
We are ready to go now. Welcome to the show, folks. I am your host, Dave Carter, and I'm jacked up on chicory coffee, thoroughly wired, jacked up, and boarded up against looters and vandals, ready to rock and roll here. Now, look, there's plenty of bad news, so much so that you don't even have to look for it. Just turn on the TV, step outside your door, and there it is. You're bombarded with it. So how about this? How about, for just a little while here, how about we talk about real audacity? Not the audacity of anarchy, for example, but a different kind of audacity. Let's go back in time just a bit, and just for a little while, and take a look at what happens when free people are determined to remain free. I think I'd rather talk about the audacity of victory. So to get down to business here, I'm pleased to welcome to the show British author Damien Lewis, who has spent over 20 years now reporting on and writing about various armed conflicts around the world. He's written over 15 books in over 30 languages, many of his books appearing on bestseller lists around the world. He is a fellow of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Most importantly for our purposes today, however, he's the author of the brand new book, Churchill's Shadow Raiders, The Race to Develop Radar, World War II's Invisible Secret Weapon. It's published by Kensington Books, and it came out just last month, May of 2020. And it's an honor indeed to welcome him to the services today. Good morning. I should say good afternoon, Mr. Lewis. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. It's afternoon here over in the UK, but I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Like I said, I've got the coffee going. I may end up putting it in an IV bag just to keep both eyes open at the same time. But I read your book over the last week, and I mean, it was just fascinating. It's a fantastic book. Just a word of caution or word of advice to our listeners. When you read the book, it might as well have glue on the book cover because it's nearly impossible to put it down. So it's very riveting. History, in my opinion at least, is essentially biography. And you've got that down to an art form. So I really, really enjoyed the book, sir.
Great.
Now, your book,
to hear it.
Yes, sir. Your book centers on something called Operation Biting, which itself centered on German advances in radar technology at the outset of the war. And the mission, if I may summarize like in one sentence, the mission of Operation Biting was to literally take one of the German radar units, bring it back to England for a look-see. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a snatch and grab raid of the best tradition.
Yeah, and this took place shortly after Dunkirk, when good news was more the exception than the rule for Great Britain, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we had a lot going very badly for us, and indeed, you know, you did on the American side when you joined the war. Things were going very, very badly indeed. Right. And, you know, in our wisdom, and I say that ironically, the British military and scientific establishment didn't believe the Germans actually had radar, unbelievably. That they in their arrogance, they believed it could only be a British invention. Well, actually, the Germans had had it far longer, and their radar was far more advanced. And thank God there were a handful of young, thrusting, intelligent, visionary scientists and military leaders who basically called out the naysayers and said, no, the Germans have this, and if we don't go and steal their radar, work out what it is, and work out how to defeat it, they will keep bringing down our bombers in ever greater numbers, and the losses are unsustainable, and the bombing missions will fail. Yeah, you mentioned. I'm sorry.
You mentioned the percentage, I believe, of the British bombers that actually got anywhere near their target, and it was depressing.
Yeah, you know, but both British and American bombing squadrons. You know, you can imagine how tough it was, especially if you're bombing at night. You know, there's no GPS. You're navigating on a map via moonlight. You're trying to find a target by roads, by rivers, by anything that shows up in the moonlight, basically. Yeah. And not only that, but you're under horrendous fire from anti-aircraft gunners on the ground. You've got night fighters stalking you, and you've got these searchlights which seemingly magically, horrifically track your aircraft and pin it in their glare, whereupon the flak, the anti-aircraft fire, starts to hit you hard. And it was that ability of the enemy, of the forces of Nazi Germany, to find our bomber streams and target them so accurately with searchlights and ground fire and night fighters that made these These visionaries in the UK say they have to have radar, and it has to be very, very good to be doing this.
Well, on that point, and the visionaries, the young visionaries, certainly were helped by a visionary prime minister that wanted to go on the offense and not just defense. But I was struck early on by the reluctance in the senior ranks of the government to come to terms with the possibility and the reality of German radar advances. To what do you attribute that? Was it just typical, here I would call it bureaucratic sclerosis, but what was going on over there? What was in their minds that kept these blinders on them?
Do you know, it wasn't just in the field of radar. It was also in the field of anything to do with what we would today call special forces. So unconventional warfare. You know, Churchill was not only an amateur scientist and a very accomplished one who believed that science would win the war for us as much as martial effort, but he was an absolutely visionary believer in unconventional warfare, small-scale behind-the-lines raiding operations. You know, he formed the commandos. It was at his order, and he founded organizations like the SAS and others. And on both those fronts, he absolutely had a battle tooth and nail to get them through. And you know, it's hard to understand 70 years after the events, but I think it boils down to largely, you know, after the Nazi blitzkrieg had rolled across and seized most of Western Europe, senior commanders and politicians believed that if we weren't going to sign a peace deal with Hitler, which almost happened, of course, and thank God it didn't, and thank God for Churchill, because he's the man who stood against it.
Right.
But senior commanders and senior politicians believed we had to roof over the island of Britain and prepare for an invasion by Nazi Germany's forces, Operation Sea Lion. And so anything which smacked of going on the offensive, of going to sending small-scale units behind enemy lines, of going to steal their top-secret technology, just wasn't in their playbook. Their playbook was about, we put up the defenses and we hunker down and we try to ride this out. And as Churchill and some other visionary commanders so rightly argued, the best form of defense is attack, and we have to go on the offensive. And if no other reason, we had to go on the offensive then to prove to the American people and the British people and the people of all allied nations, all free nations in the world, that we had the will and the ability to fight.
And I suppose that they were. I guess that their position was not, I won't say bolstered, but the fact that Great Britain had such limited resources at that time, they felt they couldn't really afford to bring any sizable resources to bear on these special operations because it would necessarily take away from defense. Is that correct? Absolutely.
So, you know, when Churchill in June of 1940, when he basically declared that you know, the commandos would be founded, but also that they would raise 5,000 to 10,000 airborne troops. Bear in mind, airborne operations had never been tried before. No one knew how to do this. The only people that had done airborne operations were the Germans, of course, during the taking of Belgium. But when Churchill declared this, you know, his chiefs of staff turned around to him and says, we don't have the airframes, we don't have the aircraft, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the experience, and we need to prepare this island for defence. And so, you know, just as an example, a practical example, the first aircraft that were put forward to train for parachute jumps were obsolete twin-engine Whitley bombers. And the only way they found you could jump out of a Whitley bomber with anything like an acceptable degree of not dying was by removing the ventral, so the belly gun turret where the gunner would have sat, inserting a metal tube, a bit like a dustbin, and plummeting through that vertically. And, you know, it was very, very, very risky indeed. So that's the kind of thing that they were up against.
They referred to those planes as flying coffins, did they not?
They did, yeah. So the Whitley achieved the nickname of the flying coffin, the flying barn door, and various other nicknames which I can't mention over the airwaves because they're too ribald. But yeah, it was really make and mend with whatever we had, and you know, this was real. The resources were in very short supply.
The window of opportunity to launch Operation Biting was the 22nd through the 26th of February 1942, during which time the weather simply would not permit it. And if I read correctly, supposedly the tide would be too shallow or too low to allow landing craft to depart with the raiders after that window closed. But a postcard changed all that somehow. Would you mind telling that story, please, sir?
Yeah, so basically, you need to launch these kind of behind-the-lines operations during the moon window. And the moon window is when you have enough moonlight to see and to navigate by, purely by the naked eye, obviously, flying in an aircraft which is showing no lights, and to drop your parachuters accurately onto the drop zone. Okay. So you needed to launch the raid during the moon window. But with this operation, of course, because you needed to steal a radar, a very heavy piece of kit, and get it back to Britain, the only way to do so was to rendezvous with some light craft, some landing craft on the nearby beach at Bruneval, load the radar aboard and bring it back to British shores. So you needed to match up the moon window with the right tide so you could get the boats in. And what happened during the first moon window period was that every single day, 5 or 6 of them, whereby the moon window was right, there was the right illumination, there was terrible weather over Britain, thick cloud cover, and the mission couldn't go ahead. And so everybody presumed it would be stood down, and they'd be stood down and they'd have to wait another month. That's if it would go ahead at all. But the commander of the mission went to the admiral at the time, who was overseeing the naval side, and basically said, look, I found this postcard, this picture postcard from before the war, of holidaymakers bathing on Bruneval Beach. No. And if you look at them, where they're just a few feet into the water, the seawater is already up to their chest, and that shows you how steeply the beach shelves. And I think we can still get the boats in despite the fact the moon window has closed. And it was on that basis that the mission actually got the green light and went ahead.
In a way, it's perfectly fitting, right? It's an unorthodox mission in that they're dropping these commandos behind the line of machine gun nests and the fortifications on the cliffs to raid and get the radar, then bring them out via the beach rather than coming in that way as we did in Normandy, because it was just you had a small group of people. It's an unorthodox mission, and it launched in an unorthodox way, so it makes perfect sense, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there were many things about this mission that were groundbreaking. It was only the second ever airborne operation by Allied forces, and it was the first ever to be launched directly from British shores. So, these guys, 120 raiders, parachutists, when they set off on this mission, very few of them actually believed they were coming home.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book they were some of them were singing songs while they were in flight en route over to the landing zone. And one of the ones I copied this because it just struck me as just so perfectly sums up the frame of mind. If I may quote from the song, it says, "When we land in one certain country, there's a job we'll do very well. We'll fire Goering and old Adolph Hitler and all those bastards as well. So come stand by the bar with your glasses, drink a toast to the men of the sky, drink a toast to the men dead already, 3 cheers for the next man to die." I mean, it's almost like a gallows humor, but it's hard charging at the same time.
Yeah, that's very British humour. I mean, it's dark, but it's also stirring. You can imagine singing that in the aircraft, and that would give you the wherewithal and the spirit to actually go into a situation where you had real doubts whether you were going to come out alive. And the other thing about it is, of course, as they found on these commando and SAS and other special forces raids during World War II, what really gelled these guys together, what really made them go into these horrendous situations deep behind the lines with very little chance of coming home, was the wish to stand tall in the view of the men to either side. So to stand shoulder to shoulder with their brothers in arms. And that was something which we really forged during the Second World War with these kinds of operations, both British, American and other Allied forces.
That characteristic came right to the fore in Operation Colossus, which you opened the book talking about. And one of the things that I was amazed at was what I so enjoyed about the book was how you were able to weave the biographical information about these real men in history. It gives that 3-dimensional element to the history. How did you learn so much about these people?
Well, fortunately, there's an awful lot of documentation that survived in the various archives, and it's very, very detailed and rich. So every single operation had a war diary, for example. But then also I had help from various family members who are still alive. There's an awful lot of our generation who are desperate to know what their grandparents or their uncles got up to during the war, because these kind of operations, repeated back to back missions deep behind enemy lines, took a huge toll on those involved in them, and often they didn't really want to speak about it after the war.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because I know that here in the States, both of my grandparents, for example, fought in the Second World War, one in Europe and the other in the Pacific Theater, and had an uncle that was helped in the liberating the concentration camps. They did not want to talk about it. If you asked them a question about the war, they would tell you the funny stories. Now, I spent 20 years in the Air Force. I'm retired military, and I kind of get that. But I didn't know if that same phenomenon took place with the British troops as well.
Yeah, very much so. I'll give you an example. So, and it's about this book. So there are two radar experts left alive, John Hooper and Laurie Hinton, who I managed to make contact with, and I went to meet them both. Obviously, they're in their 90s. Yeah. The amazing thing was, I didn't quite get it at first. Both of them almost still felt they weren't allowed to talk about it. So 70 to 80 years after the events we were talking about, they were reluctant. And it was only when there was some coverage of the book in the newspapers, and they saw their story, their untold story, getting the limelight, getting headlines at last, did it open the floodgates, if that makes sense? So yes, very much so. There is still this sense that these operations were top secret, and people were supposed to go to their graves with those secrets. And also they were traumatic, and people find it hard to talk about these things. I
saw a little bit of the former in some of my family members. Once I spent some time in the military and did some deployments and had some adventures of my own, then they would kind of open up a little. But there was that element of they'd look around as if to see if anybody was listening as they were going to tell me these various details, which was, like you said, it's long past. There's no sensitivity to the information any longer, but it's ingrained. It's second nature to them.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I do come across that with these kind of stories. It was just their second nature that you didn't talk about these things, and so many take their secrets to their grave.
And looking at your bibliography, I don't imagine, it doesn't appear to me at least, that you had a lot of trouble getting access to primary source documents. Is that correct?
No, absolutely. That's one great thing about both the British and American archives, is that there's a massive documentation there, and you couldn't do these kind of books without it. You really couldn't. Right. That's the best material of all, because it was written at the time, often by people in the field, writing the war diaries. It's really prima facie accounts of what took place. It's gold dust. And without that, it'd be very, very hard.
One of the things, more interesting parts of the mission, well, it's all interesting, but to me at least, something that stood out was that upon taking the radar unit, these commandos were to blow everything up to bits around them, which is what they did, to make it look as if the radar unit itself had been destroyed, so the Germans would not be aware, at least initially, that the Allies had got that piece of equipment. Did that work out pretty well?
Yeah, so the concept was, they had a shopping list of all the components of the radar that they had to get, from the most important being the aerial down to the labels on the various units and everything in between. Yeah. And the idea of blowing up the radar site, so what remained after they'd stolen what they wanted, was so that the enemy would hopefully believe it'd been just a normal raid to sabotage and not to thieve and steal. Because obviously, if the enemy realized the radar had been stolen, then they would presume we'd stolen it, try and work out how it worked and how to blind it, and then they could presumably adopt countermeasures to try to stop us doing that. It wasn't particularly successful. It's a fascinating part of the story, but
the
German commanders on the ground,
they could see what pieces were missing.
They could see what pieces were missing, but not only that, somebody, think about it, had to tell Hitler. Now,
yes, I'm sorry. I remember that part of the book. Yeah,
you're sat there in Normandy. It's a beautiful part of France. There's no food shortages really. There's very little in terms of war going on. You could be on the Eastern Front, which would be an altogether different matter. And you've got to go and tell Hitler that your top secret war-winning radar has just been stolen by in an audacious raid by the Allies. And I think it was 48 hours, maybe even longer, before somebody plucked up courage to tell him. And of course, Hitler flew into one of his classic rages.
Sure.
So yes, they realized very quickly it had been stolen, but that didn't stop us developing the technology to blind it, which was the whole reason for going in there. And
so thoroughly was the mission planned that you had a radar, I think a radar repairman that was actually part of the raid team, Sergeant Cox, and then you had another, was it Jones, who was offshore making his way to help secure the radar and get it back, right?
Yeah, so you had Jones, who was a flight sergeant. Yes. So he was a radar he wasn't a scientist, he was a radar technician. Okay. So he went in on the actual raid because they realized that, commandos and paratroopers wouldn't necessarily know how to take apart a radar, right? For obvious reasons. And so Cox was in charge of actually doing the looting to make sure they got the right bits of loot and didn't damage it. Yeah. Which he did very well. And then you had Priest waiting offshore, who was actually a very high-level radar technician expert. And the reason Priest wasn't allowed to land, originally he was supposed to parachute in with the raiders, and the raid planners realized pretty quickly that if you parachute into German territory, one of Britain's top radar experts, things could go badly wrong. Sure. Because if he gets captured, the mission has spectacularly backfired. Rather than stealing their secrets, you've given the enemy a huge range of your own secrets. Right. Because, of course, no man, or very, very, very rarely in the war did any man manage to maintain silence in the face of the tactics of the Gestapo or the SS. Sure. They had ways of making anyone talk. Mm-hmm. And so if Priest were captured, it would have been a disaster. So he had to wait offshore.
There's this book is fascinating on so many levels. There are multiple stories that unfold, but this also includes the genesis of the SAS. And if I read it correctly, that kind of started with Operation Colossus, or can you just kind of summarize that for me? How the SAS came to be throughout this?
Yeah, so in June 1940, when Churchill called for the formation of the commandos, this revolutionary, fast-moving hit and run behind the lines warfare. And adhering to none of the gentlemanly rules of warfare, right, as many in high positions saw it. So when Churchill called for the commandos, the call went out for special duty volunteers or special service volunteers. That's what they were called. Mm-hmm. All these men volunteered, and he decided that he wanted an airborne cadre as well as a seaborne commando unit, and so the airborne unit, Special Service Volunteers, had the word air inserted into the name, and so you have Special Air Service. That was the root of the name, and it was pretty much coined in kind of September 1940, and 500 airborne SAS troopers began training, and they carried out their first mission, which was Operation Colossus, a raid deep into Italy to blow up a viaduct, and deprive 3 million Italians and Germans of fresh drinking water. A raid which was amazingly successful considering the odds. Right. And then when David Sterling in North Africa in the deserts, some months later, decided that they needed a deep desert raiding force to go and attack German and Italian airfields deep in the desert to try to stop the Axis air superiority there. It was one of the leading lights behind the original Special Air Service, who said to David Sterling, "Take this name, take this identity, because by doing that, you'll give it history, and it will be more convincing to the enemy that you really exist, and that will strike the fear of God into them." So that's exactly what he did. So it's kind of like that's the origin story of where the SAS came from.
And in fact, the first designation for an SAS unit was 11 SAS, so that the enemy would think there were 10 others of these things at least.
Yeah, so the guy who actually thought all this up, Colonel Dudley Clark, brilliant and maverick, free-thinking individual. And what he became known for most in the war actually was deception operations. And he said, look, the first Allied airborne troops, the SAS, will be called Number 11 Special Air Service, simply because the enemy will then presumably think there are 10 other previous SAS units, so therefore there would be 5,000 troops already, airborne troops already trained, and this would be the next in the batch, as it were. And, so brilliant deception.
Yeah, and assuming the success of their first mission, which it was, then they're thinking, oh my God, we've got 10 others of these running around. So yeah, that's great.
Absolutely, that was entirely the intention, and worked very well.
Yeah. A last question on the book, and there's a fascinating story, and it really intrigued me, that involves the famous great British actor David Niven. How did he figure? It was a quick cameo appearance, but how did he figure into all this?
So when Dudley Clark was charged by Churchill to form the commandos, this groundbreaking force, Clark requested David Niven, the actor, to join his fledgling commandos as one of the kind of key trainers. And Niven had just come back from the US, where he was obviously a very well-known actor, and had volunteered for service and now volunteered for special duties. And Niven, being a something of an unusual character, was coming back from a late night dinner outside of London, so driving back, and there was an air raid. And of course, during an air raid, you're supposed to stop and not travel anywhere and adhere to all the rules. Yeah. Well, Niven wanted to get back to London because he had work to do. And so he stopped in the middle of nowhere, changed out of his dinner dress into his uniform, his military uniform, thinking he could slip through the checkpoints that way. Right. But unbeknown to him, he was being spied upon by some of the Home Guard, this force raised in Britain to watch out for the enemy. Sure. And they pounced on him and arrested him, believing him to be a German spy. And it was only when he actually managed to convince, the police who held him that he was the famous actor David Niven, that they finally decided to let him go.
I love that. Sure, I'm David Niven. Yes, right. And I'm Queen Elizabeth. This is just great. Sure, okay. That's wonderful. Now, in this brief discussion of the book, I should tell our listeners that I haven't even done a good job of scratching the surface of all the stories that unfold here in this wonderful three-dimensional narrative. So I got my copy through Apple Books. Now, Mr. Lewis, if folks want to get their own copy, where can they go to obtain a copy of your book?
I guess Amazon's a good bet always in this strange time of lockdown. And Target has it, as I understand it. So it's pretty much available anywhere. Yes. I know over here lots of people are getting it on Amazon because, as I say, I don't know how things are over there, but we're still under some restrictions. So, if you've got anything like that going on, Amazon's a fantastic bet. We're still under restrictions unless you're, vandalizing the place, then you have free reign. But that's another topic entirely. So, all right, Mr. Lewis, thank you so much. It's been an honor and thoroughly enjoyable talking with you, sir. Likewise, fabulous. Thank you very much. All right, you take care. Folks, that's Damien Lewis on the Dave Carter program.
Today's topics and the people you want to hear on the Dave Carter Show.
That's Mr. Damien Lewis. And I got to tell you, this book, Churchill's Shadow Raiders, the race to develop radar, World War II's invisible secret weapon, really is an amazing work. Of course, it helps that he was writing about amazing people and their courage in the face of a Nazi juggernaut that appeared literally invincible and unstoppable. You ever stop to wonder what the world would be like if the idiots who tried to vandalize his statue, what it would be like if he had lost? Fantastic book. So did you enjoy hearing from Damien Lewis? And are you enjoying the show so far? And have you joined Ricochet yet? Because there's a great deal more to hear on the Ricochet Audio Network. The American Enterprise Institute's got a show with us. So does Andrew Klavan. Former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett has a program on the Ricochet Audio Network. And Commentary Magazine is here as well. A great many other fine folks that provide you some of the most compelling commentary that you'll find on the Internet. Now, usually, if you want to comment on these programs or you want to comment on the contributor post or read and comment on member posts that's behind the paywall, you start out by ponying up $4.50 a month. And if you want to write your own post and see your work published in one of the most influential websites in the country, then you pay 50 cents more per month, $5. And that lets you read what you want, comment where you like, and write your own columns as well. Well, what do you do with a good deal like that? You make it better. So here's what we've done. For the listeners of this program, if you're not currently a member of Ricochet, You want to take this whole website for a free test drive, go behind the paywall, see what it's all about. Just go to ricochet.com/gumbo. And nothing but the best for the best. This Louisiana kid's going to give you guys a free 30-day shot at it. Ricochet.com/gumbo, Gumbo. You can try it out, see what you think, and then $4.50 per month gets you in the door after that initial 30-day free trial. So give it a shot. Go to ricochet.com/gumbo and join the conversation.
For the person who has everything, it's antibiotics. No, wait. It's Dave Carter on Ricochet.
That's good music, isn't it? Now, I mean, nothing beats the blues, which is what my next guest made fairly plain to me when I asked him to be on the program. Ricochet member Randy Wido. Randy Wyvoda. he coached me on this, and I just screwed it up. Randy Wyvoda, Lord have mercy, wrote to me, and he said, I've always appreciated it when you play some blues music on your show. So it's not like you have to twist my arm or anything. I've looked for an excuse to do it. But, man, do you like the music, Mr. Randy?
I do.
All right. By the way, folks, if you take me up on my offer of that free 30-day trial membership and become a regular member of Ricochet, then you could end up on the program and talk with me as well. And you tell me what kind of music you like, and I'll do it and try not to screw your name up as well. Hey, Randy, are you still driving that Mustang that I remember you having before?
Yes, I am.
What year is that? That was a beautiful machine.
Yeah, that's a 2011 Ford Mustang GT.
Yeah.
And I've got about 55,000 miles on it now.
That's it?
And the thing is, I live in Minnesota, so that's not a wintertime car.
Right.
And up until a couple of years ago, I've been working full-time in my family's business, which is like right next to where I live. So even in the summer, I didn't drive it very much. So
okay.
Yeah, it doesn't get a lot of miles put on it, but it's just a lovable car.
I remember you.
It's like it's a new car yet.
Well, you drove it down to the meetup that we had in Nashville. I think that was in 2015, I think. 14. And I was just, oh man, it was great meeting everybody. But I kept staring at the car, and Shelley was, look at that car, look at that car. It's the same thing. So now you've been a member of Ricochet since 2011, I believe, and you're one of the moderators as well, and you're pretty thoroughly involved in these meetups, both attending them, and I think helping to put them together. Looking back through all the long years since 2011, how did you find Ricochet in the first place? What got you tuned into us?
Well, from time to time, I would read Jonah Goldberg's pieces on National Review. Yeah. And on one of them, at the end, he said that he's the guest on the Ricochet podcast. So that's the first time I'd heard of it.
Okay.
He had a link to the podcast, so I went and listened to it. And one thing that was a pleasant surprise is that one of the co-hosts is James Lilacs. Now, I'd never heard of Peter Robinson or Rob Long before, but I knew who James Lilacs was because he's from Fargo, which is like a 6-minute drive from where I live. So the local newspaper would sometimes run pieces where he wasn't working for this newspaper, but they would reprint some of his stuff. So I'd been a fan of his for years, but I bought a couple of his books. And so I thought, well, this is great. I've got to listen to more of these podcasts. And at some point, I gave in to Rob Long's pleading for, if you want to keep this thing going, we need money. Right. I figured, well, I've given this thing a pretty thorough test drive. I think it's time I throw some money into the kitty.
I call that the skin in the game speech.
Yep.
Right. Well, how long was it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Some other people must have fallen for the speech in that very same podcast, because I was looking at the dates that a number of my Ricochet friends joined, and one of them joined the very same day, and another one had joined like 3 or 4 days earlier than I did. So
okay.
He must have had a particularly powerful.
I must have brought out the violins
speech.
Or something, or
yeah.
maybe. Well, he's into acting. He produces and things, and so maybe he ginned up some tears, and I don't know.
It was from the heart.
Right,
sure.
exactly. Now, how long was it after you initially joined that you started getting involved in the various meetups? I mean, how did all that come about? Rob Long was talking about meetups.
2011 that I joined. I think the first meetup I'd gone to was in Minneapolis. I don't recall what year that was. Mm-hmm. I don't think there really were many meetups those first few years anyway.
They're few and far between.
But the first one was in Minneapolis, and then maybe 2014 it was.
Okay.
And then I'd put one together in Fargo, and there aren't many Ricochet members who live near here, but Hank Rohde came up from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is 5 hours away. And that was pretty cool. And the reason we did it at the time that we did it is because Whiskey Sam, who's not on Ricochet anymore, but used to be pretty prominent, he, for his job, traveled around from city to city doing some sort of computer contract work.
Yeah, he still does.
And so he was going to be in Fargo, so I figured, well, let's have a meetup at that point. Okay. And James Lilacs was there, and this was not something that was expected. It was sort of after we'd already had the thing set up. He had written to me and said, hey, when is that meetup you're doing? Because he was coming back to Fargo for like a niece's graduation or something.
Oh, okay.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
The first meetup I hosted had James Lilacs there.
Yeah, he's super. I had him on the program here a couple of weeks ago. He's fantastic. Yeah. So now you guys, I think the last it was like a mini meetup, I guess that you were a part of, at least, was in Chicago back in February.
Yep.
Okay, and if I understand correctly, the next one coming up is in South Dakota in September. Is that right?
Yeah, that's going to be a fairly big one. You guys
to meet with all the bikers or something, or what?
No, the Sturgis Mustang rally, or the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, rather, is in August.
Oh, okay.
And we are going there at this time, though, Labor Day weekend, because that's when they have the Sturgis Mustang Rally.
Okay.
Which I've been to a couple of times. And Concrete Vol is coming all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Really?
He's got not just any old Mustang. He's got a Shelby GT350, which is just a hot piece of awesome.
Yeah, right.
So I'm really looking forward to seeing that car.
I met him at one of the early meetups, and several times afterwards, and he was at mine and Shelley's wedding as well. Super nice guy. Still stay in touch. I still have, if he's listening, I still have the moonshine that he gave us as a wedding gift. I haven't gone through it all yet. I could run my car off of it, but it's tasty. It's good stuff, Just got to stay a step ahead of the revenuers.
Yeah, well, at that Nashville Mega Meetup, he brought a whole bunch of Sugarland Shine.
I remember
is the brand that he brought. In
all
a variety
these different
of flavors.
Yeah, What I remember of it was good.
Yeah, so, and at Vicryl Contessa's parents' house was the first night of that meetup. We had that party, which was just a fabulous time. And I wasn't in the mood to drink that night, but my wife had some of the apple pie moonshine and said that stuff is really good.
You could taste the crust. You could taste the crust of the pie in the moonshine.
And so when we were going home, we'd stopped at a few liquor stores in Tennessee and figured, well, let's pick up some of that to bring home. And none of them we went to had that brand. And so we bought this Old Smoky brand, which is a far inferior product. But eventually a liquor store that's like 50-some miles from where we live stocks the Sugarland Shine brand. So now we've gotten some of that, and the apple and the butterscotch, and it is good stuff.
I think I've got the butterscotch. I don't know. I've got a couple of these things. I mean, they're fantastic though. Now you're a moderator as well. So does that keep you kind of busy on the site? Are you having to spend a lot of time on there, kind of looking and babysitting, or how does that work out?
You know, from time to time, you'll have a period of heavy misbehavior, but most of the time, you know, you could go a couple of weeks with only a few flags thrown, and half of those might have been accidental ones. Yeah. So typically, there's not much to it. I'll pop into the Slack thing a few times a day to see if there's been a flag thrown that nobody else has dealt with yet. Sometimes you'll have some serious misbehavior, and you know, we'll consult with each other. Right. If it seems like some disciplinary action needs to be taken, you know, most of the time it'll just be a case where, okay, somebody said something that's nasty or whatever, and so we'll go in and redact something and put in a note saying redacted for rudeness or something like that. When you've got somebody that acts up a lot, then we'll consult with each other and say, okay, is it time to give so-and-so a timeout? Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the actually is one of the good things is that the members oftentimes police themselves because they're paying into this. They want to keep it civil, but every now and then, if nothing else works, then you can clean the place up anyway if you need to. You know.
Yeah. I think you are completely correct. That being that Ricochet's model is that it's a paid membership, it's very different than the sort of websites where all you need is an email address. And so people feel like, I've got nothing invested into this. Right. And if I'm a jerk and they kick me off, so what? I'll just create another email address and come back. Right. Where if people are putting a little money into it, even though it's only a few dollars a month, you feel like you're part of a club and you want to keep the club respectable. Yeah. And people just if there are 10,000 websites where you can go and be a jerk for free, well,
go do that.
If that's your aim, then
off you go then.
Why would you even want to come to Ricochet?
Right. I'm going to switch gears on you completely here because I'm curious, but you just recently started a new job, right?
Yep.
What may I ask?
Yeah, well, heck, I'll give you my whole resume.
Born in a small village near Fargo.
Well, I grew up in my parents' small business. Okay. So since the 6th grade, I've been working at my parents' business, which is a retail carpet store. Yeah. And then a couple of years ago when they decided that it's probably getting to be about time to retire, so they're looking to sell off the whole property, the land and building and everything. And the store is still open for now, but when they find somebody to take the whole thing off their hands, then they're going to close it. And I have no interest in taking it over. Once upon a time I thought I would, but you know, like a million other small businesses, that people are just working all the time just to break even. Right.
You're not sure if you own the business or the business owns you.
Yeah, that's right. And so when they decided that that's the plan, I figured, okay, I can still work at the carpet store part-time, doing the things that nobody else knows how to do, and I'll get a full-time job somewhere else. So for almost 2 years, I worked at a place that sells new and used helicopter parts, although sometimes whole helicopters, but mostly parts. And then 3 weeks ago, I left that job because they don't believe in pay raises there. Okay. And took a job as a forklift operator at a grocery distribution center.
Okay. That's a lot of long hours there.
Yeah. It's the hours aren't necessarily too long, but it is a night shift. So I go to work at midnight.
Okay. I kind of like. I did a lot of shift work when I was in law enforcement and security work and security forces, of course, in the Air Force and everything. I kind of liked working at night, knowing that I could sleep while everybody else had to go to work. That was kind of cool. Just kind of a weird little thing. I'm sleeping right now while you're at work. You know.
Yeah, it took a little while to get used to it, but it's working out for me.
Good. Now, at some point, I've said this before, and maybe we'll work well on this, but I'm not sure exactly when. But before too much time passes, I want to do a meetup in Memphis. In a safe part of town, but I want to do a meetup here. So,
well, I'd be happy to help you set that up.
That would be awesome.
Say, I don't know if you know about this, but we've already got a plan started for next year's big meetup.
Okay.
So Patrick B, 63, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember now. He lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and him and I had talked about one day doing a meetup on the Bourbon Trail.
Yeah.
And so the plan is to have a 3 or 4 day meetup that either starts in Louisville and ends in Lexington or vice versa. And we want to do this during horse racing season. And so we'd figured that October of next year would be the best time to do it.
Yeah.
And go to a horse race at, I think the name of the track is Keene. I don't remember. It's been a while since I'd seen it, but it's in Lexington. And so the idea would be start out in one city or the other, visit a bunch of distilleries, and take in a horse race, and who knows what other things we might do.
I have a very close friend, basically extended family, in Louisville, and he helps run the KFC Yum Center, among other things. So this is interesting. Yeah, I would like to talk to him too. Maybe he's got some ideas of some cool places and things too. Cool.
Yeah, and I'm actually not a bourbon drinker myself, but
I'll help you along.
I enjoy seeing how things are made.
Yeah.
You know, it could be something as pedestrian as washing machines. Still, seeing how it's made is interesting.
Right.
And so visiting these distilleries would be cool. And then I can be a designated driver anyway, so that the people who do enjoy bourbon can go ahead and, sample the wares at the different distilleries.
You do that.
I'll not worry about driving.
I will be a designated drinker, so we'll make it work. All right, man.
Are you?
Huh? Sorry.
Are you familiar with a song by that title by
No.
George Strait and Alan Jackson?
No, I'm not. I'm woefully
It's called,
untutored in a lot of that.
Yeah, it's called Designated Drinker. It's a terrific song.
Oh, I'll check it out. I'll check it out. I'm going to have to use that too. All righty. Well, listen, I'm gonna have to wrap it up. But man, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight. It's been fun.
I appreciate that you invited me, Dave.
Oh, and I hope you and yours are continuing to stay safe through all the virus and everything else that's going on. So.
Yeah, same to you.
All right, very cool. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, sir, and you take care, folks. That's Randy Wyvoda, I got it right, on the Dave Carter Program.
It's the Dave Carter Show on Ricochet.
Was Randy Wyvoda, and actually I just wanted to pronounce his name one more time correctly to make up for having screwed it up earlier. Now, if you're curious to read and hear a little bit more about what I do and my own perspective on a great many issues and things, I invite you to check out my website over at DaveCarterOnline.com, which is where you'll find a collection of articles that I've written, many of them predating my time in Ricochet, and along with a slew of podcasts, and one specific page there called The Inkwell, which is a running stream of commentary for the readers of my website. Again, that's DaveCarterOnline.com. As always, it's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I'll be checking in again with you soon. You folks take care.
Thank you for listening to The Dave Carter Show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a single episode. And while you're there, please leave a review and tell us what you think. And on behalf of all of us at the Dave Carter Show and the Ricochet Audio Network, thank you for listening.